You may have gained the impression from the opening visuals that this program is going to be about geography. Well, it isn't. It's about the International Teaching Fellowship Program, which is an exciting exchange scheme for teachers, which has been operating successfully between Victoria and countries around the world. With me is Rex Murfett, the Principal Employment Officer of the Victorian Ministry of Education and Coordinator of the International Teaching Fellowship, or ITF program. Rex, welcome to the program. Give us a brief idea of the history of ITF.
Well, Trevor, the ITF program really has been part of the education establishment in this state for a long time. It was begun in 1971 by Dr. Laurie Shears, who was a former Director General. He wanted to recruit expert teachers to help us over a teacher shortage we were experiencing in the early 70s in subjects like maths and science and English. And the idea was to go to English-speaking countries like United Kingdom, Canada and the United States and get excellent teachers nominated by the various states and provinces to act as teaching ambassadors, if you like.
So what is the purpose of ITF?
Well, the idea is to perhaps to make excellent teachers even better. We nominate outstanding teachers with some experience and give them an opportunity to benefit from this fellowship by working and teaching in overseas countries.
It sounds like it could be expensive. Who meets those sort of costs?
Well, it's not a very expensive item at all, really, because the actual costs are borne by the fellows themselves. The ministry is responsible only to see that the thing works, and there's a relatively small administrative cost attached to that.
So what sort of numbers of teachers are we concerned with here?
We have averaged about 50 teachers since the program was expanded to make it possible for Victorian teachers to take part. That happened in 1975, and since then we've had about an average of 50 teachers a year. So that's 650 teachers, I guess, in the last 30 years. And don't forget there's 650 visitors as well, because we have a two-way aspect to the program, and of course there are families involved, and each fellow has about 4 dependents. I think we're talking about over 5,000 people all up.
That's an incredible number of people over those many years. What countries are now involved in the project? You mentioned some English-speaking ones,
yes,
13 years ago?
Yes, it began with the English-speaking countries, but now we've got, as well as those, that's United Kingdom, Canada, United States. We also have France and Germany, Japan, China, Yugoslavia, Greece. Hopefully we'll get Italy and Spain. But more importantly, in recent years, we've established contact with the International School Network in Europe. And this gives us a marvellous opportunity to extend our program into a whole variety of countries and still not be saddled, or handicapped perhaps is a better word, by language difficulties.
All right, you might be interested in these comments that we're about to see. I talked to 3 teachers who've recently returned from their host countries after a year overseas. Your year's experience through ITF's rather unique, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you want to explain why?
Well, I was born in Australia and I went to the mother country of my family, and I lived there for a period of 12 months. I knew very little about Macedonia until about 3 years ago, when I got involved in the community language program in Victoria.
What was the personal experience of returning to your family's homeland?
Really, having grown up with 2 identities, I found that both identities came together, because for the first time I saw everything I had dreamt about and what my parents had been saying throughout my lifetime until now.
What were you teaching over there?
I was teaching English to children and adults and giving talks to groups and students in the Centre for Foreign Languages, as well as observing classes in Macedonian.
Richard, let's take a trip down memory lane. What was it like? What went through your mind when you were advised more than 12 months ago that a placement in the ITF program had been found for you, but in Alaska?
Well, the phone call was that there had been an exchange made, and obviously I was very excited about it. And then the name Alaska came up, and a little bit of shock, because you consider that the United States isn't quite Alaska. So we were really very bewildered first off, and then I went home and told my wife that we'd been considered to go to Alaska, and she was shocked completely, because we have those conceptions of ice and snow and igloos. And so we started to do some work on it, try and find some information about Alaska. And of course, in Mildura, where I'm from, there's very little information about Alaska, and I suppose there's very little information in Victoria about Alaska. So the information that we received first off was not very good, not very helpful. So we then started speaking to people who've already been on exchange, and that was a great help. People said, "Oh, how lucky you are getting Alaska, what a great place for an exchange." And we thought, oh, we are privileged, we aren't the bottom of the barrel or anything like that.
Alex, there's a perception about the ITF as being an exchange to other English-speaking countries, yet the fellowship you chose was to China. What were the reasons behind that?
Well, it's true that most of the fellows go to English-speaking countries, and when my wife and I were talking about the application, we thought about each of the countries and decided that China was culturally and historically very interesting to us, and so that was our number one priority.
Whereabouts did you go in China? What was the personal experience of moving your family into a strange city in a strange country?
Well, we went to a city called Suzhou, which is a very ancient city, and last year it celebrated its 2,500th anniversary, which was that was a cultural shock of a kind, as we came from such a young country and such a young state.
How does the ITF program work, Rex?
Well, Trevor, the idea is, as I indicated, is to send expert teachers overseas and also to benefit by having expert teachers come. Now, at the same time, of course, we can't send a Victorian teacher away from his school and have him lose his job, so we have to protect both our visitor and the local teacher. Now, it turns out that the easiest way to do this is by matching. And what we do is to take the highly recommended applicants we get from all over the world, and we match them with the very highly recommended applications we get from Victorian teachers. We take enormous trouble over this. We match them as tightly as we can with their jobs. We look at their housing and look at their spare time activities so that we get as close as we can to a perfect match. Now that means that they can go into each other's places and their jobs and fit in very easily.
All right, so who's selected and why?
Well, we identify teachers who have been well experienced. We require 10 or more years by and large. These are people with proven ability as classroom teachers, because they really do have to act as ambassadors of their profession overseas, and of the state of Victoria too, and Australia.
I'm sure the professional development aspect's important, and so would the experiences that those teachers bring back to their schools and classrooms when they return.
Yes, I think I said at the outset that the idea is to make good teachers better, and the professional development component, the personal professional development growth that happens to these people is really remarkable.
All right. I spoke also to our returning teachers about their professional experiences overseas. What were the professional lessons that you as a teacher learned out of your year's work in Alaska?
Sure, that's a difficult one, because really I have got a lot of respect for Australian teachers, and I think we do a pretty good job, and we can give a lot too into the Alaskan system. There are lots of things I saw over there which we would like to have in the Australian system as well. The musical program of instruments, the science kits they have over there, the provision of resources are the sorts of things that we would love to have here. But I think as teachers we do a pretty darn good job, and it's that business of picking up the cream of the ideas that are around, which is the good part about the program.
International teaching fellowships are two-way streets, of course. What did China have to teach you?
A great deal. It'll probably take me a while to absorb everything that I learnt during the year. On the professional front, you don't need videos and a vast amount of electrical equipment to be able to teach. The facilities in China are extremely limited, but a lot of good teaching goes on in spite of that fact that they just don't have the things that we take for granted in our schools.
It was just a real experience, and when you come back here after having such an experience, you really appreciate everything that does exist within the Victorian Education Department, such as support groups and so on, that we as teachers are fortunate in having. I never really noticed any such support groups while I was overseas, so teachers were just teachers and never really had meetings and so on where they could perhaps be informed or even be promoted. They were in the same positions for a number of years, and from a personal experience I would like to move on in life, whether it's still teaching but continue growing in the teaching area. And I think living in Australia we really have those opportunities, but very few of us have a really good look, and it's only until we live away that we really discover the beauty that does exist here.
That's interesting. What do our teachers offer overseas schools?
Well, Trevor, it happens that Victorian teachers have a terrific reputation overseas. Part of the reason for that is they're well trained, but I think more importantly they're adaptable, and this derives, I think, from the fact that they're obliged to look after their own curriculum development in schools. So they take great flexibility. And of course, there's because they're so flexible, they can adapt to the changed programs that they meet with relative ease, and they do really well. As I said, they're very well reputed.
Do you get feedback from overseas schools and ministries and departments of education?
Yes, every year we get letters of telling us and just how well our teachers have done. We're really very proud of the program and proud of the people who make the program so good. I should point out, of course, that overseas everyone is really interested in Australia, especially the kids in the schools. And our teachers are told before they go overseas to be sure to take plenty of kangaroo badges and things of that kind with them. It's especially true, however, in the countries where other than English is spoken, the migrant source countries that we are involved with. It's very important that we get Australian life understood by those people too.
You might be interested to hear what our ITF participants felt that they were able to offer to their overseas host schools and students.
Alex, allowing for the fact that your exchange was to a tertiary institution, what were your observations and experiences of the Chinese educational system?
Well, I was teaching at a tertiary institution, but we were able to visit a number of other institutions, and we saw high schools and primary schools and kindergartens, and in general I'd say that the education is much more formal, the instruction is much more formal, and the relationship between teachers and students is much more formal than we're used to here, and that's something that many of the students commented on, that they appreciated the warmth that we tend to show. And I'm not talking about myself. I think there is an Australian teaching style which is different from the Chinese teaching style, and it's much warmer according to the students. And they were training to be teachers, so they were very interested to see how a different approach to teaching could be effective.
What sort of things do you think Macedonia, through your visit there as a fellow, might have nurtured or gained from? What do you think you had that you could teach them?
Right. Perhaps greater flexibility in teaching styles, not that rigid, stand in front of your classroom, teacher-like situation. It gave teachers the opportunity through me to see that I was willing to respect children more than children, but as participants in an actual classroom. I really moved at the level of the children and really gave children a fair go rather than saying, no, that's wrong. I was willing to listen to each child, and also just the way I used materials. I mean, I really enjoy making materials, and I did manage to buy paper and made a few flashcards, and that really made the class quite more exciting than if you just stood there and just used your face.
What were you able to export from your teaching experience here to the school in Alaska?
I think it's the Australian character more than anything. We seem to be a little bit very open people and reasonably friendly people, and that has a lot to do with how well you get on with the rest of the staff. And by having that, breaking down those sorts of barriers, of professional barriers, we seem to be able to communicate extremely well. And I think the idea of our writing curriculum we have in the Victorian schools really goes very well in the Alaskan school as well. And our educational philosophies about the way children learn, something that we can give to those people as well.
Rex, it seems fairly important to me that the ITF teachers are not merely tourists, but they're living and working in a foreign country, in their host countries, as part of a community for 12 months.
Yes, Trevor, you've said it exactly. This isn't an exchange program per se. It happens to work best by exchange, but it's even not universally an exchange program. But the idea is that we should give our outstanding teachers in mid-career an opportunity to become part of the teaching service and the life of another country. And it's for this purpose that we take such care in trying to get them established into communities through housing and so on.
We've mentioned a word a couple of times in this program so far, and that's ambassadors. They really are teacher ambassadors.
Indeed they are, but to be effective teacher ambassadors, they've got to be able to communicate at the level of the community, and that's why it's so very important to us that our teachers in their overseas positions become effective in those positions. It's important that they become an entrenched part of that school. In fact, they're very successful at it, and we hear so many stories of broken-hearted people who are really so sad at having to leave the friends and loved ones they've made in their year overseas, so that we know that it works in that respect.
I'm sure the cultural exchange aspects must be very, very important. I can imagine also that it's one thing to be a teacher in an English-speaking country, Canada, the United Kingdom and America. What about non-English-speaking countries?
Well, that's an aspect of the program which we have developed in relatively recent years, the last 4 or 5, I think. And as I said to you, the ITF program is really an umbrella. It enables us to do a variety of important educational things. And one of the things that the state of Victoria wanted us to do was to provide opportunities for teachers to go to the homelands of some of our non-English speaking members. And that's the reason.
Well, picking up on those cultural aspects, I asked our 3 participants what their experiences were of travelling and living overseas.
I spent a whole month and a half travelling throughout Yugoslavia, and this was the wonderful part of the ITF program because they have a long break during June, July and August, and I chose to travel around the Yugoslavian countryside, and I saw a great deal of beauty that I hadn't heard of from anybody, because having had my parents come out 35 years ago, and their memories aren't of course the experiences I had, and it was just a wonderful opportunity to see beauty such as old museums and visiting art galleries, going to the theatre, and just the Adriatic Sea was just a beautiful experience.
Suzhou is... It's hard to explain. Everything is different. Everything is different. The housing is different. The language is completely different. The shopping is completely different. You don't have supermarkets. Just most things that we take for granted, we could no longer take for granted in China. The fact that most people in China don't have private cars. One of our first things that we bought was a bike each and a little seat for our daughter too. And that's the main form of transport.
When we landed at Anchorage Airport, it was 10 o'clock in the morning and still quite dark. We did feel a little bit frightened, and then we're driven to the place where we're going to live on those icy roads, and again still that sort of feeling that, my goodness, what have we done? But I think that goes after the first couple of weeks, and you start seeing what an exciting place it really was and how different it was from where we lived. And that was the best part about the whole exchange, that it was so different and that we experienced so many different things. It just became a wonderful place to be. And the thing that really was the hardest part was that we were so excited when we got the exchange, and we didn't realise at the end of that 12 months we'd have to say goodbye to people, and it became extremely sad.
Kevin Collins is the General Manager of the Schools Division for the Ministry of Education and is closely involved with the ITF program. Welcome to TV Ed. Kevin, why does the Ministry back this project?
I think the reasons have become fairly obvious today, Trevor, from what Rex has said and from what Susan, Alex and Richard have said. we are a Ministry of Education, after all, and we are a schools division within that ministry. So we back the system because of its educational value. Now you can look at that in a number of ways. I think, as Rex has said, our first concern always in education anyway is the children in schools. And you can imagine the immense benefit that children derive from having a teacher from another system, from another culture, because of the close relationships that teachers develop with their children and with young people at the post-primary level. They gain immense understandings and appreciations, and it sort of brings an international flavour to the classroom and to the school, and that's a real educational benefit.
Do you find that is shared by the parents of students in Victorian schools who've got an overseas teacher for 12 months?
That's the second benefit that I'd like to talk about, really. Because of the close relationships that schools have with their communities, and because teachers engage widely in activities beyond the school, the educational benefit extends right beyond the school walls into that community. There's no doubt about it. But even confining it within the school itself, there's great benefit. Good schools are places where there is good coordination, good communication, where teachers, parents and students work together for goals and objectives that are agreed. Now bring in a person from another school system, from another culture into that. Comparisons can be made, and so the whole school is enriched by the presence of an international visitor over a long period for 12 months, and that's really good for the school and the community and for the students. And of course we mustn't forget the benefit for the person themselves.
Obviously the personal experiences of all concerned are important, and I spoke further with our 3 ITF participants about some of their personal experiences overseas.
What do you think was the best thing to happen for you as a result of your year as an ITF?
Perhaps the best thing, and it'll always be with me, was being accountable to myself and making decisions that I felt right about making, rather than hearing the school bell and knowing, wow, it's coffee time, or it's afternoon recess, what am I going to do the next lesson? It gave me a sense of direction, and within this sense of direction I really learnt a great deal about myself and where I wanted to head.
On a personal front, it's taught me that people's living conditions are very different. We're very lucky in Australia to have the sort of accommodation that we have. The range of food in our shops is incredible. I'm still surprised when we go to the greengrocers after a couple of weeks back in Australia. It's amazing to see the range of fresh fruit and vegetables. They're just teaching styles. I don't think I'd adopt some of the teaching styles, but it's interesting to see how other people go about the task. And the other thing I'd say is I've gained a great deal of respect for the Chinese people, because it's a vast country, it's a very poor country, and it has a lot of problems, but the way that people are working to overcome the problems is quite amazing. And when you look at Australia's problems, in contrast, well, we don't have any.
It was difficult to come back. I mean, it's always difficult when you've spent a year away, because your heart and mind is in one country, and you're then expected to resume your old life again with your friends who've had a year of experience that you haven't been part of. And the conversation that goes on has to do with their year and not your year. And it's something you have to be aware of, that you're not going to be a celebrity or anything like that. You've got to fit back into their life and not vice versa.
I offered an elective course in Australian literature, which people seem to enjoy, and I hope that if nothing else happens out of the exchange, at least at that university there is an awareness of Australian literature, and people seem to be very keen to continue offering an option in Australian literature.
Well, I came home with a lot of peace, and peace in the sense because I found that part in me that was Macedonian, that was stored there for 25 years. So living amongst all these people really, for the first time, allowed me to come face to face to that part that I wasn't really nurturing.
Rex, what's in store in the future for the ITF program, do you think?
Well, it is an international teaching fellowship program Trevor, and we want to make it increasingly international. That's why we're interested in the international schools network in Europe, and why we're hoping that by 1988 at least we might have Spain and perhaps even Italy involved in this program. We have trouble in some respects. I'd like more women to apply because we get a disproportionate number of men applicants, and the teaching service is mostly, well, at least 50% women. We'd like to see more women there, but by and large things are looking pretty good.
That's excellent. And Kevin, what future is there for ITF as far as the Ministry of Education is concerned?
There's no doubt about it, Trevor. We'll continue to support the program as we have for the last 16 years and at its current levels of participation.
Well, that's something for people to look forward to. Rex, just give us an idea of how you like to encourage more women to apply.
Well, I think women by and large appear to be uncertain of what's in it for them. We build the program essentially as a family program because the support of family is very important overseas, but it's not uniquely important, and a great many single people, single men and single women, can go overseas and have a wonderful time. Right. I'd like more of them to do that.
All right. On that note, Rex Murfett and Kevin Collins, thanks very much for being with us on TV Ed. Our special thanks also, of course, to Susan, Alex and Richard for sharing their experiences and some of their slides and photos with us. And here are just a couple more to take us out. Till next time, see you then.